Last year, at this time, I stood in front of the congregation and shared about the shame and stigma of mental illness. I spoke as a parent of a child who had struggled with active thoughts of suicide, along with depression and anxiety. When I shared this a year ago, Mint was in recovery in intensive residential treatment settings. And as I said then, with a combination of access to the right care and incredible hard work, he found confidence and a path forward, and I'm proud to report that he is thriving. Okay. But to start my remarks today, I want to take us back 8 months before last Rosh HaShanah to when I dropped off Mint across the country for an extended stay at a therapeutic boarding school in Utah, no less, with no particular end date set. Nothing could have prepared me for the intensity of the emotions of that moment. I had to come to terms with the harsh reality of the situation. I felt the pain of separation. I was afraid and I was despairing. What if things don't change? What if things don't get better? And after I said goodbye, I fell into a pit. It felt like I fell into a pit. And within seconds, the tears just came, and they came. And I wept on my way to the airport, in the airport, on the entirety of the plane ride, in the car back home. I wept myself to sleep, and I woke up and I wept more. It was the most hopeless and the most helpless I have ever felt in my life. While still in the pit, I found solace in a book by Dr. Brad Reedy, which was designed for parents in situations exactly like mine. And on the question of what to do now that my child is away, he suggested 2 pieces of advice. The first, work on yourself. Heal your own wounds. The second, believe your child can get better and show up in this situation with that kind of faith and hope. Now, the first part, that made a lot of sense. I could do that. The second part, believe, have hope. Really? I had no evidence for hope, no reason to believe that things would get better. But at the same time, I recognized that crying and worrying myself to sleep were not really helping the situation. So I made a decision. I took a leap of hope, and I put faith in a better future for my son and for all of us. Now, that decision to actively move from despair to possibility may or may not have impacted the overall trajectory of Mint's healing journey. I hope it did. But either way, it made all the difference to me. Because making a choice to believe gave me a measure of control in a situation where I had virtually none. Instead of waking up hopeless, I woke up with purpose. I showed up as a parent and a partner in a profoundly different way than I would have had I stayed in blame and shame. And when Mint was ready to come home, My joy exceeded my worry because I had believed by then a long time that a better day would come. I share this story with you because today I want to talk about taking a leap of hope, even and especially when things might feel difficult or impossible. And this feels like an important conversation to have on Rosh HaShanah, which is also called Hayom Harat Olam, the day the world is pregnant with possibility. A day of wild and hopeful dreams for the future, yet one that arrives at a moment in history or a moment in our lives where we might not necessarily feel so hopeful. And so today I want to ask, what might it be like to believe in a better future even when there is no evidence to support that belief? What opens up for us as individuals and as a collective when we make a choice to move from despair to hope? Before I continue, I want to mention that I have been hesitant for years about writing a sermon that explicitly uses the word hope. That is because hope in modern parlance is often applied in ways that are unhelpful and sometimes dangerous. When someone tells a friend that is facing a dire medical diagnosis to just have hope, they are simply soothing their own anxiety and in the process denying the range of emotions that person is experiencing, leaving that person alone. When someone shrugs off the terrible things happening in the world and says, well, all I can do is hope, then hope becomes an excuse for passivity and inaction and leaves the world unchanged. That is not the kind of hope that I am talking about today. The kind of hope that I want to lift up is a nuanced hope that recognizes pain and grief and nonetheless invites us to imagine a better future. This kind of hope is expressed in a very unexpected source. In the middle of the book of Lamentations, the book written by the prophet Jeremiah in the aftermath of the destruction of the first temple, right in the middle of that book are these words: Yiten ba'afar pihu ulai yesh tikva. Let us put our mouths to the dust. Ulai, perhaps there is hope. There's so much to uncover about hope in this evocative image. While most of us, thankfully, have not experienced the kind of atrocity or terror that the ancient Israelites did when their first temple was destroyed and when they were exiled from their land, each of us can imagine a time in our lives, and perhaps that time is now, when we have felt so bent over that we could virtually taste the dust on the ground. When we could not imagine that we will be able to stand up straight again. But then, perhaps, a voice inside of us, or the voice of a loved one, or perhaps a voice of some sense of divine motivating us, utters the words, ulai, perhaps. And we know that we do not have to deny grief or despair, but we also do not need to let those things immobilize us. Ulai. There's so much power in that word, perhaps. Ulai is the possibility, not the guarantee that things will improve. Ulai comes from a stance of humility, a recognition that we just don't know. We can't predict the future. And this ulai, this possibility, can help us get unstuck. and act, even if things are different than what we had hoped. And then the power of emerging from the dust on the ground to say, Yesh tikva, yes, there is hope. With these words, Jeremiah is not only speaking to his community, but to every generation, reminding us of the human capacity to transform despair into hope. Yesh tikva does not imagine a perfect world that looks a particular way. It just signals a possibility. Yesh tikva. It could be better. This is the kind of hope that I want to invite us into for the new year. For our own sake, for the sake of others, and for the sake of our world, our planet. To do so, I want to offer 3 tools to help us say Ulai Yesh Tikva in the coming year. Acknowledging what is, turning to our ancestors, and envisioning a new world. The first, acknowledge what is. A few months ago, I was working with a thoughtful Bar Mitzvah student in preparation for her Devar Torah for her Bat Mitzvah. We started talking about hope as it arose in some of the Torah that she was reading and we were studying together. This near 13-year-old looked me right in the eye and said, Rabbi, I really don't have hope because I see all the terrible things that are happening, what we do to each other. I see all the hatred, the racism, homophobia, and she went on. I nodded, also appreciating greatly her age-appropriate cynicism, and I responded, that makes a lot of sense, and you are right. We are not supposed to have hope based on what's happening right now. Because if we were, that would be ludicrous. It would be impossible. Hope does not come from this world, but in our belief of what the world can be. See, as Jews, we are not meant to accept the status quo. To see injustice and marginalization, devastation of natural resources, and to tacitly accept that this is the way of the world. We are the people of the Exodus, the thwarting of evil dictatorships, freeing the innocent. These are not one-time events, but models for all of civilization. We believe that the world is not yet redeemed. According to Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, this is the very essence of Judaism, to offer hope in a world, in a future that is not realized. Our rituals, our texts, our traditions are all designed to help us reject complacency and the blind acceptance of fate. Judaism, Sacks says, is a sustained struggle, the greatest ever known, against the world that is, in the name of the world that could be, should be, but is not yet. So let's think for a moment. What might change if we stopped looking to this world as a barometer of hope? What if we considered our mitzvot and our actions for the sake of a future world, not this? The second, turning to our ancestors. When our Israelite ancestors left the terrible life of slavery behind and marched towards an uncertain future, they brought with them the bones of their ancestor Joseph. This simple act symbolizes the way that we are truly never alone, especially in times of fear and uncertainty. We are always accompanied and strengthened by the ancestors who came before us. So when taking a leap of hope, it can help to pack our ancestors along for the ride. We bring along those Jews in every timeline in Jewish history and in every place who have had their mouths to the ground and yet found the strength to say, Ulai yesh tikva. Even so, there is hope. Those who, despite the attempts to silence and erase us, have stubbornly refused to give up on our vision of a better world. We can call on the memories of Viktor Frankl, who witnessed the atrocities of the Shoah and affirmed that life still had meaning. Hannah Senesh, who risked her life fighting the Nazis. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose dissent offered a model for all of us, and countless others. So I want to invite you for a second just to take a moment to bring to mind right now an ancestor, Jewish or not, who in big or small ways affirmed life and hope despite it all. Take a second. Who can you pack along with you for the journey? The poet Yehuda Amichai uses a beautiful phrase in his poem, The Old City. He says that the Jewish people are negua tikva, infected with hope. Infected with hope. Hope is something we cannot escape or shake. It is who we are. It is in our bones. Third, envisioning a new world. How did our ancestors do that? How did they find the strength to say yesh tikva? A midrash, a rabbinical commentary that I learned recently from Bobby Brightman, a former teacher of mine, answers that question. The midrash looks at 4 biblical characters and asks these rhetorical questions. How did Noah survive the flood and live to see the children exit the ark, thus enabling a new generation of humanity? How did Moses go from fleeing Pharaoh to defeating him at the sea? How did Joseph go from being a prisoner to a governor in Pharaoh's court? How did Mordecai from the Purim story go from being given a death sentence to being on the other side of the story? In other words, how did these ancestors who confronted terrifying situations end up transcending their fate and triumphing? And then, in classic midrash form, the text answers its own question. And for each of these examples, it's the same simple and profound answer as to why they could do those things. Ela ra'a olam chadash. Each of them could see a new world. That is how. Each of them could see a new world. The rabbis who wrote this midrash were not writing for the generations of Noah, Joseph, Moses, or Mordecai. They were writing for all of us who came before us and all of us who will come after. And they were saying, it is aleinu. It is on each of us to be visionaries for a new and better world. It is our sacred duty to imagine a world at peace, a world of freedom and harmony with earth and all living creatures. It is our sacred obligation to never give up on the messianic dream, even if we are not going to be alive to see it fulfilled. Now, this is a far cry from our modus operandi, correct? It is so easy for us to be cynical in the world we live in. We have even evolved as a species to focus on the negative as a survival mechanism. Yet we know that cynicism and negativity are not practical and not helpful in helping us move toward the lives we want to live and the world we wish to see. In the words of writer and historian Rebecca Solnit, to hope is to give yourself a future. to hope is to give yourself a future. And we are going to need chutzpah to craft this vision. Spiritual discipline to refuse to abandon the vision in the face of floods and evil dictators, those that came in our ancestors' time and our own. And we're going to need tenacity to act in big and small ways for this Olam Chadash. I know the power of this kind of imagination firsthand. How much can change when we make a decision to imagine a better world? As I shared at the beginning, this is how I picked myself up from the lowest, most despairing moment I've ever experienced, with my mouth to the dust, stood up straight, eyes on the future, and started living in a vision of a better world. Envisioning an Olam Chadash, a world different than our own, is no small thing. It is a spiritual necessity. It gives us a future. I conclude my remarks today with a story that I learned from Rabbi David Wolpe about the late Hugo Grin, who was a child at Auschwitz. When Rabbi Grin was a young boy in the concentration camp, his father fashioned a makeshift menorah for the holiday of Hanukkah. And on the first night of Hanukkah, his father took their precious margarine ration and lit a wick to bring in the first night of Hanukkah. Now, seeing this, young Hugo was filled with anger. Outraged, he protested his father. How could you use the food that we use to survive just to observe a holiday? And at that moment, his father spoke words that he never forgot. His father turned to him and said, "My child, it is true that a human being cannot live without water for 3 days. And it is true that we cannot live without food for 3 weeks. But we cannot live without hope for 3 minutes. Yiten ba'afar pihu, ulai yesh tikva." Face to the ground, there is hope. It's 586 BCE, it's 1945, it's 2023, today, the first day of 5784. Amidst the pain, the despair, the struggle, we can still choose hope and turn our despondency into action. May we acknowledge what is and what is not. May we be emboldened by the strength of our ancestors. And may we imagine an Olam Chadash, a new world. And from that place, may we have the courage to shout from the rooftops, Yesh Tikva. We have hope because we choose it for our sake, for the sake of our loved ones, and for the sake of the generations that have yet to come. Shana Tova Umetuka.